Hi, everybody. So we are representing the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change for the Bangladeshi government. And today we'll be presenting on our plan for implementing the village cluster model and streamlining our country's land acquisition process.
So yeah, just to get a little more in depth, our goal is to implement sustainable risk mitigation and management practices while developing the economy of underutilized regions, mainly looking at 3 cities besides Dhaka that are potential climate refuges. So these would really be refuges for people that are most likely to be displaced, especially in coastal regions, as well as people who are already displaced and are suffering in the slums outside of Dhaka due to overcrowding. And we would, to build these up, we want to develop rural areas outside cities using the village cluster model, which has been recommended by the United Nations. And we would do this in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Land.
So Bangladesh is suffering one of the most from all the countries in the world from climate change, despite not being one of the drivers of the climate crisis that we are currently in. We have mass flooding that is coming in from the northern mountain regions that is decimating cities alongside river areas. And not only that, the decimation of these areas is causing for people to be displaced from their houses and areas. And generally speaking, they are all migrating into Dhaka. This is creating a significant amount of pressure on Dhaka as a city that cannot sustain this level of influx of displaced people into the city. And as a result, even then, developing the city and cities around has become incredibly difficult due to the billowing amount of people that are entering into the city.
So we recommend the village cluster model, which is an alternative to the problem of refugees fleeing the climate crisis and going to Dhaka, which cannot sustain them outside the construction of existing slum communities. So the village cluster model allows for the development of industry-specific communities that are a lot more sustainable environmentally than alternative communities. It is recommended by the United Nations, and we recommend looking into developing a pilot program with Khulna, Kumilla, and Mymensingh, each surround Dhaka, which presents an alternative to joining the slum Dhaka communities. And not only do we recommend building up those communities and just encouraging people to go there, but we plan to invest in building up the agriculture industry there. So we plan on encouraging agricultural industry, including through agricultural education. So kind of playing off of the American Morale Land Grant Act and working to establish land grant colleges in those areas that focus on agricultural sciences, agribusiness, crop management, and agricultural development. Additionally, we are learning lessons from other places that have tried to work on the village cluster model by really focusing on the agricultural sector and developing that industry. So in the case of India, with the dispossession of Rajpura, they did not focus enough on preventing gentrification. So we are focusing on building up this agricultural industry and retaining the original owners and farmland of existing settlers.
So this program that we are suggesting is doing 2 things. One, it is a risk mitigation towards it is a risk prevention program that we are doing. And the way that we are doing this is creating an institutional framework for setting out a plan for this year and then in the coming years. So our ministry is given the mandate to focus on environmental concerns and to focus on doing things such as regenerating soil and improving the environmental status of the area as a whole. We think it is very crucial to work alongside the Minister of Agriculture, which has a great way of introducing good agricultural practices into these areas that we are proposing, and as well as the Ministry of Land, which has a land acquisition basically responsibility, or the equivalent of what we would think of as eminent domain. We think it's incredibly important to work alongside the Ministry of Land, as it's been recommended by the UN to continue doing land acquisition in order to focus on the fact that people are being displaced from their houses, areas, etc. But one of the issues with this is that the program itself is incredibly complicated and it can be incredibly long to go through for land acquisition. So on the recommendation of international organizations such as the World Bank, we are going to focus on improving this process alongside the Ministry of Land by doing things such as increasing staffing in that division, as well as making sure that there, for example, one issue is like pricing. How do you get the right actual fair pricing before you buy out someone's area? And one of the ways you can do that is through the development of a market price database, which has been recommended before.
Now to the funding aspect of this project. So as we've discussed before, we are really trying to test the waters by starting in certain areas, but looking for expansion for the project in terms of different villages. How we plan on initially funding both the increasing staff and these initial test projects is through funding the programs that already exist with the International Monetary Fund. We're totaling roughly 1.5 billion. We don't expect to use all of that money in the initial testing, but it would be helpful if we want to expand rapidly to already have that on loan. So we're looking at the extended credibility facility loan program, which has a 0% interest rate and a grace period from payments for 5.5 years. It matures around 10. And then we have the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which has a 0.55% interest rate based on our general income as a country and previous lending, which has also a grace period of 10.5 years. We've recently received these funds as a country in the total of 4.7 billion this past quarter because of trying to revitalize our economy post the COVID-19 pandemic and due to losses caused by the Russian-Ukraine war. So there is precedent to say that we would be coming back to them for an environmental-based concern. Additionally, we're looking to prevent finance corruption by using Microsoft's ACTS program, which is basically a tool that allows for you to verify and track the money that is spent on different contracts. So we'll be able to track the spending for all of this, all of the financing down to the dollar amount, which is awesome.
Yeah, so in terms of our environmental considerations, this focuses on risk management. As we said earlier, Bangladesh is not responsible for, in large part, the climate crisis. And so we're focusing on mitigation, which is why we're targeting at-risk but salvageable land. One important thing that will limit the environmental impact of this project is our focus on sustainable planting. So both in terms of agriculture, where we're pursuing a plan to plant legumes. Legumes can be grown in rice fallows, so when fields are not being used for rice to let the soil rest, you can plant legumes, and it actually is really beneficial for the soil in terms of increasing nitrogen. You're looking at a picture now of a case study in Burkina Faso where they implemented legume planting in rice fallows. We're also encouraging planting and replanting mangroves, which are really important in terms of forest cover in Bangladesh. Having mangroves reduces flood damage when floods do happen, and are also really big carbon sinks that will really decrease the environmental impact of this project. Additionally, the village clusters we're developing and the educational projects that go along with that are creating outlets for further ecological research.
Looking really quickly at the timeline for this project, as we said earlier, this is a pilot program, so we want to complete all the steps we've described and then assess the success of the test cases for possible expansion of the program in 1 year. So initially, so the first steps are getting funding from the IMF through the aforementioned programs and identifying initial land parcels for testing. And then we will be developing initial testers and working on the distribution of legumes and really encouraging the agricultural development. Then we will be finalizing placement for protective mangrove forests outside of these villages in 4 months. And then at 6 months, we hope to have the benchmarks where people are choosing village clusters, as well as we have completed our first crop cycle of the lagoons.
The overall goal for economic impact in the long run is to create a secondary market, because we rely too much heavily on our current garment market, which is not economically sustainable and has recently seen a decrease in demand due to heavy criticism internationally for that lack of sustainability.